I can guarantee a medical school acceptance if you have a 4.0 GPA and 520 plus on the MCAT. Actually, no, I can't. It's a myth that high stats guarantee acceptance, and I can prove it. Out of every 6 applicants who had greater than a 3.79 GPA and greater than a 517 MCAT, 1 did not get into a single medical school. That means that over the last 3 years, 1,654 premeds with extremely high stats did not get into any medical school they applied to. Here's a premed with a 3.96 GPA, 521 on the MCAT, 0 acceptances. Today, I'll show you another high stat premed, 4.0 GPA, 521 MCAT, who earned multiple top 50 medical school acceptances. I were a premed with high stats. I'd analyze this application closely, making sure that I do not make the critical mistakes that lead to rejections everywhere.
Okay, another application breakdown we have here. Today, we're looking at this application from 2020 for the 2021 cycle with a 395 GPA, 521 MCAT. So starting off with some pretty strong fundamental stats. A lot of things to go over here. And we'll go over all of it so we can extract as much learning as possible from these. But I think we should just start with the conclusions, just so you guys get a sense of what to expect in this breakdown. So one, we'll talk about this concept of kind of progression, I think, in your pre-med years. I like to follow the structure of more, then better, then new. I find that a lot of pre-meds jump straight to new before exhausting more and before exhausting better. And this applicant does a great job of going fully deep into the things that are already working, then figuring out how to do the things he's already involved with better before considering a new activity. And I'll give you examples here outlined in yellow. In his themes of vision and then community, as well as some of the overlap there in between. Number 2, we'll talk about how stories and data solve cliches. I don't think there's ever been an application that I've read in my entire life where there is not one cliche statement. I actually don't think cliches are bad. Cliches that are unsupported sound very generic and mediocre, but cliches that are very well supported with stories and data just hit differently when it comes to reading the exact same phrase that has evidence, that has support. And you'll see examples of how in a vacuum, this applicant writes phrases that can be cliche or cringe. But because he has a story and the data to back it up, it lands very well and it comes across as very impressive and meaningful. So number 3, we'll talk about how it's okay and it should be okay that not every activity is absolutely life-changing. I see a lot of applications where they try to swing for the fences for every single activity, 12 to 15 home runs. And I just don't think that's reasonable within a short 3 to 4 to 5, 6 year pre-med journey. Not every activity is going to be the most meaningful. That's why there's only 3 of them. And so overreaching and over-describing activities as sounding more important than they actually were to you can be a detriment. And I think this applicant does a good job in certain places of making sure that this is just what the activity was. Very straightforward, hit it right on the head, didn't do much of any stretching. And then there's some places where I think there's a little bit of an overstretch and he's trying to make it sound better than it is. Just to reiterate, it's okay that not every activity is absolutely life-changing. I think making sure that you're genuine and straightforward to the activity and what it meant to you, that will do you more than overstretching things. So don't overdo it, recognize, and we'll talk about that. So those are the 3 main conclusions here. And you'll see how this 3.95 GPA, 521 applicant really took advantage of his extracurricular activities and built a substantial application to get into a very competitive medical school, the University of Cincinnati. Okay, so we'll start from, why don't we start from the top conclusion here, where I'll give you an overview. So we'll look at these extracurricular activities individually, but the concept of more, then better, then new. So these are 4 extracurricular activities all associated with vision for this applicant. Notice one that he does Spanish translations for a vision clinic in rural regions. I underline rural because this matches the community theme that we'll talk about in a bit. And there's data here where he cites that he supported the collection of 1,556 classes, which we'll look at in a bit. And then 2, we have this $200,000 plus in services, which supported 400 to 600 plus underserved patients. That was a clinic with vision services. Again, similar, right? Not exactly the same. Here, he's more responsible for Spanish translation. Here, he's more responsible for the finances and the budgeting and getting the clinic together, but still in this vision services, vision clinic. And this is our first example of just more, right? He does a good job here in this vision clinic, and he did more of that in a different context. Then we have extracurricular activity C, ocular research with ocular albinism. You'll see that his basic science research was all about kind of eye diseases. And then 4, even his clinical experience, shadowing specifically, because A and B are both clinical experiences, but his shadowing also 22 hours, most in the ocular ophthalmology field. And you're starting to see this vision theme go deeper and become more developed over time.
Every year, over 50,000 pre-meds apply to medical school, and over 60% don't get into a single one. If this video hasn't been completely trashed thus far, I highly encourage you to take a look at the free resources we have in our description box below. Click the link in the description box to find out more, and for now, let's go back to the video.
Okay, here we go. Here is the team volunteer extracurricular activity. He volunteers with a nonprofit organization that provides free vision, dental, and medical care to the underserved in rural regions, driving 4 hours to a clinic on Friday night with a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift on Saturday and a 6 a.m. to noon shift on Sunday before making the trip home. For many pre-meds, these details, and remember that doctors and admissions committee members in the past were pre-meds before, so we'll all kind of resonate with this weekend kind of banger of a trip. Driving all night Friday, doing a long shift on Saturday, doing an abridged version or a bridge shift on Sunday. We're all pretty familiar with the nuts and bolts of volunteering. And so when I read this, it felt very nostalgic for me. And I'm sure it does for other AdComs readers. And so these details drive the story. It's an exhausting weekend of service that I think most of us can relate to. Then I was invited to join Blank's team, which is comprised of volunteers that led a section of the clinic. I was trained to lead the vision truck for 3 clinics, and under my leadership across the last 5 clinics, 1,556 glasses were created in need, right? It takes some time to really develop the story, but once you hit the reader with some data, you can really get a sense of the impact that this person had, right? 1,500 glasses for patients who previously needed them but did not have them. One of my first positions as a volunteer was a Spanish translator. Need was evident, there's not a lot of Spanish translators, but members were always calling over the radio for them. Again, an interesting detail that really puts you in the scene. Oh, we need a Spanish translator in table C. As I approached the first man I translated for, crossed arms and tensed shoulders, right? I think some of us who have spent time with patients who are in hospital settings, you'll recollect the image of a patient who just doesn't want to be there, either because they're scared of their illness or because they've waited for so long. But this crossed arms and tensed shoulder, again, the details help you be a part of the story, indicated to me that he was guarded and nervous. Because he was at a clinic, he had certain financial obstacles, added language barrier, more challenging to overcome. He needed someone who could understand him, right? This is a great example of point number 2, which we'll talk about later, which is cliches without stories or data just fall really flat. I can imagine, I've probably read this exact sentence for another applicant with no other supporting data. He needed someone who could understand him. But when you put it in the context of 1,500 glasses, this person who has financial difficulties and is scared for his health and has a language barrier, then the sentence lands on your ear a little bit better because you have the story, you have the data to tie it back to. Though my Spanish is far from perfect, I was able to help him work through the vision wing of the clinic more smoothly than he would have otherwise. This is an example of the counterpoint, where he says something and he doesn't really give us data, right, or a story. Like, how did he help him go through the clinic more smoothly than he would have otherwise? I assume that it's related to Spanish, but just because there's a lack of detail, this doesn't really land very well. In the downtime between sections, I ran and got him some food when he was hungry. His gratitude and was entering the waiting room for his classes moved me. Personal insight. I've been inspired to improve my Spanish during my gap year. Hopefully that it will facilitate these interactions that are so important. So this is number 1. You start to you start to get a sense of who the applicant is on paper. We get this person who's interested in vision, like made this huge impact by generating 1,500 classes, and then starts to recognize that not all patients have the same access to healthcare. In this case, this is a person who doesn't speak the language, has financial difficulties, and as a result, almost doesn't feel welcome, right? Crossed arms, tense shoulders. So that is number one. Let us now dive into the $200,000 in services to see how this applicant is exemplifying the concept of more, doing more of the things you're good at. So this is a leader in an organization. He spends 300 hours in it. I am in charge of organizing a free clinic at my school in conjunction with blank that is expected to serve 400 to 600 disadvantaged people. Again, the data is very, very powerful here, and will likely be donating around $200,000 in services. The number really strikes me. I don't know exactly what the service is. Let's see what he does. Specifically, I lead a team that handles the recruitment of medical professionals and student volunteers, marketing of our clinic to our community, and the one surrounding as acquisition of meals for volunteers, arrangement of housing for employees and the team, collaboration with the school and the police. This is a big, big initiative, right? The police, the community, the volunteers, the transportation, and fundraising to cover our budget, which is about $10,000. Our clinic, originally scheduled for April 3rd, 5th, has been rescheduled for later this year due to COVID-19. Okay, fine. So you see how I'm highlighting in green that data is queen, right? When you say 400 to 600 disadvantaged people, that feels different from some community health fairs that I've been that have served 15 to 20 people in a day. When you talk about donating $200,000 in services, that feels different from running a walk for cancer and you donate $200, right? Both are important, but the $200,000 in services lands a little bit harder because you have that strict hard data to fall on. A budget of $10,000, data makes it very, very much more relatable. According to the 2018 Community Health Assessment Report, 62% of residents live below the 200% line of the federal poverty level, which is more than double the statewide rate of 27%. So he lives in a place where they're double the statewide rate of poverty. According to that same report, 12% have no health insurance, 14% have no dental insurance. These and other discouraging statistics highlight the dramatic need for intervention in this community and leave me feeling grateful for the opportunities and support that allowed me to become the person I am today. Our clinic provides free vision, dental, general medical assistance to those who need it most. This is especially important as the pandemic is taking precedence. Okay, I've come to appreciate the importance of not only helping curing individual maladies, but also being active at the community level. Okay, so you can see how now when we erase the data and he's talking about kind of what he's reflecting on, it's all well and good. And I think it lands better than it would have if there were no data here, right? If you're just reading this and you don't know, hey, they have a community health fair that donates $200,000, serves 600 people with a budget of $10,000, then all this kind of sounds very flat. But again, this is more in the vision, medical, dental space. So you can start seeing how he's doing more in that vision, more in that underserved space, right? The last one was rural areas. This one is here in a place where the community has double the normal poverty, the statewide poverty rate. And you can start seeing how he picks his niche of people to serve, the rural underserved, and how he helps them, vision, medical, dental, right? And these community health fairs. Okay, great. Let's scroll back down to our third one. Let's talk about our ocular research, which is here. So laboratory assistant, 400 hours. I researched ocular albinism in a mouse model at the laboratory. I learned key techniques, okay. A week after starting, I did my first experiment, and after 3 weeks, I worked without supervision. Okay, you're starting to see some growth. I carried out 7 experiments in mouse retinas and contributed to the project by replicating previous findings, eliminating error in the protocols, optimizing concentrations. Okay. I was invited to return to the summer and will do so. Okay. So you can see how, at least in this paragraph, the thing that I noted was he demonstrates growth by saying, and after 3 weeks, I worked without supervision. But you can also see this paragraph kind of doesn't hit as hard, right? Generic is the bane of writing. You can't really fully understand what he means here when he says, I was invited to return this summer and will do so when blank returns to normal operations. It's kind of like my reaction to that is, okay, that's great. And you've also told me you know all these cool techniques and you worked without supervision for 3 weeks, but I don't really get the sense of the level of impact or expertise he has, right? I carried out 7 experiments in mouse retinas. I don't really know what that means. Is that a good thing? Should you be doing 50? Should you be doing 3? So a lot of things, it's just not relatable for the average kind of AdCom reader. But let's look at the second paragraph. On an Uber ride I took to the laboratory one day, my driver inquired about my work. I explained the anatomy of an eye in a way that would be understandable to someone, and noted that the disease I studied lied within the retina, where our body converts light to a signal that our brain can understand. We then discussed how proteins are the functional actors of our body, sounds very complicated, and how studying the abnormal protein levels seen in this disease could point to a cure. This experience helped me realize that my future patients will have similar clarifying questions, and that their ability to make educated decisions about their treatment hinges on my ability to communicate relevant information from new research clearly, right? Very long sentence that basically says patients in the future will have similar questions, and it's important for me to be able to communicate. Though it was challenging to read through papers on the subject and understand them well at first, I learned that I'm approaching the science from the bottom up. Okay, not sure what that means, and doing background research to fill in the gaps helped me understand them better. It became easier to critically evaluate new information and explain it cogently to those with little background, kind of similar to what he writes up here, right? So it's a little bit redundant. I hope that scientific literacy I've developed will help my patients retain a sense of autonomy by equipping them to more effectively choose between treatment options that I present. Again, it's just, I think the last couple of sentences are redundant. I also think that a lot of the writing here is overly complicated, longer than it needs to be. I try to have most of the writing in the work and activities section be kind of at that 5th to maybe 7th grade level, which a lot of people are surprised by. But I don't think that we need to impress our admissions committee writers, or readers, I should say, with how fancy our writing is. I think we should optimize for clarity and straightforwardness that tells our story. And phrases like these can be kind of hard to interpret. Proteins are the functional actors of our body. I'm not really sure what that conveys, right? And so I kind of write this here. How so? Do I take you for granted? You don't have to know exactly how to write now, but be wary of activities you may not feel like you can say much about. So what I mean by that is, my assumption is whenever someone overcomplicates something, it's usually a sign that they do not understand it as well as they'd like, or they do not like it as much as they'd like. I'm not saying that that happened with this applicant. This applicant may have just been encouraged to write in this way. But I find that it is more difficult to simplify your writing and make it clear and make it straightforward so that, again, everyone can read it. Ironically, this is what he's talking about, right? Explaining his retina research to someone with limited scientific background, but he writes this paragraph in a way it's honestly kind of hard to interpret. So if you're not writing your application right now, the big takeaway for you is make sure that all the activities that you do, you feel like you've got this threshold where you can explain it at your holiday party to your aunt who works in accounting, what it is that you do in your research and why is it important and why do you care about it, as opposed to the abnormal protein levels and the functional actors of our body and the retina and all these things. I think that a good measuring stick to have for yourself is this simple enough for me or someone else that isn't in medicine to understand? And when I am explaining it, do I actually enjoy explaining it, right? Do you notice yourself hiding behind complexities? Or do you notice yourself like easily simplifying it, sharing it in a way that's fun for everyone, and that everyone, no matter what background they have, can take something away from it? And when I read this, I got a sense of like, is it that he doesn't like it, or does he not understand it, or was he just kind of taught to write this way? I would err on the side of simplicity. I love the conclusion from this experience. Communication is a vital part of medicine. It's cliche, again, it's very cliche. You'll read a lot of applications that have this, I need to make sure that my patients understand me theme. But the story with the Uber driver, even though it's could be improved, I think it does bring out the points of the message. That communication is really important. You can see as I'm kind of reading it with you live, I have the same reaction when I was reading it on my own and annotating this. Redundant, hard to really understand what it means. So start with the activity. What about it is important? What stories or data support this? For this one, it's communication, bridging science and people. So make sure that the whole thing is really about communication. You make that clear. Here, ironically, if the whole thing is about straightforward communication, there's parts of the writing that are confusing that make it not easy to interpret. Next, we have that shadowing for the last part of the vision. You'll see that the majority of his shadowing hours, the majority of the 46, almost half, are patient consultations and laser procedures. Those are ophthalmology procedures. So you can start to see him develop this vision theme more and more and more, right? I even put this in this nice little graphic for you. Ocular albinism research in this vision, 22 hours of ocular shadowing in this vision category, the Spanish translation for the rural regions, and the 1,556 glasses. That's also vision, but also this community theme. So I put that in the middle. And then we have this $200,000 donation, 400, 600 plus underserved patients, underserved vision clinic here. And as we've been going through these four, you can also see that the community theme has started to come out, right? We have this COVID, we haven't talked about the COVID clinic hosted in the church and churches, but we'll look at that right now. But you'll see that these two also have associated community themes with them. So you're starting to see this overlap between vision alone and community alone, but also between the two, vision and community together. You're starting to see that deepening of the vision theme. What most people do is they will start and have this fantastic first activity with the Spanish translation at the vision clinic, and then they will jump completely to something that's not related at all, like, I don't know, like neuroscience and sports athletes was one of the things that I did. And then you'll start to see this resume that's a complete hodgepodge of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different things. Actually, let me give you an example of another applicant who I think had that issue here so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, here. So you'll see this example of an application that feels a little bit just disjointed. A lot of new things that are popping up everywhere, right? So we have someone who's doing breast cancer research and is a plastics medical assistant, but is also an ophthalmology medical intern, but also does a podcast about Latinx issues, but also is a patient caseworker advocate, homeless outreach volunteer, and English curriculum for students in Mexico. So you're starting to see this theme develop, and that theme roughly kind of develop. But you also have the geriatrics volunteer, the peer mental health coach, the underserved community tutor, and the personal statements all about Indian culture and preventive health. So this one is a little bit more disjointed, a little bit more scattered, as opposed to what we have here, which is a clear deepening of this vision theme and a clear deepening of these community themes that can overlap. And so this type of application happens when I think we start to think more to new. We want to go new, different things, right? We go from breast to ophthalmology to Latinx to geriatrics to peer mental health to the underserved to Indian culture. And this example here is an example of more, right? So we figured out vision is something that we care about. Vision, 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 vision. And that's 4 deep extracurricular activities in that area. And the same with the community. Okay, so that's how I recommend kind of proceeding through your pre-med journey, is going through more, then thinking about better. Like, can I do any of these better? Instead of 200,000, can I do 500,000? Instead of 1,500 glasses, what would it take for me to get 15,000 glasses? Then do better, and then consider doing new. There's a big threshold that I want you to cross before you start doing new things. Okay, number 2. We have stories and data and how they solve cliches. Let us take a look at some of these orange asterisks for me to show you what I mean. All right, here we have example number 1, where the student is a volunteer recruiter at an organization that hosts clinics for the underserved to solve the COVID-19 testing crisis. They've opened up several testing sites along the East Coast and need volunteers to help run them. I have assisted by reaching out to 228 churches, right? A lot of us will talk about how we were content managers, social media managers, volunteer directors, one of these many various positions that are available on many clubs. But this feels different, right? I reached out to 228 churches in the areas surrounding Kentucky and New York to recruit volunteers. That allows you to avoid this cliche of, I will continue contributing in this way as long as they're in need. That by itself is really kind of cliche, right? But when you say and you pair that with his impact here, reaching out to 228 churches, that feels different. That being said, as long as there's need feels a little bit flat because he only worked on this for a month and 13 hours. But the data allows us to make it feel like we understand more of the scale that he was involved in. A couple other things that I want to point out. So you'll notice these are highlighted in orange. We are experiencing in the U.S. Remember, he's applying to U.S. medical schools to help run them, right? This sentence would not have changed if you deleted that part. They have opened several testing sites along the East Coast and need clinical and non-clinical volunteers, period. But he added to help run them. I have assisted to this end. What if you just deleted that? I have assisted by reaching out to 228 churches, right? This experience has allowed me to be a part of this solution, right? Very wordy. And then I will continue contributing in this way as long as they're in need. Also very wordy. That doesn't really share that much more. This is what I call the bat signal. This is the bat signal that the activity may not be as impactful to the student. I mean, why would it, right? It's a month, 13 hours. Yes, he did have 228 churches, but you can start to see bits and pieces of writing that is kind of overdoing it or overstretching it for really little gain. And so it's possible that it's just poor writing that can be adjusted if the applicant kind of was aware of it. But I do think that it's most likely because this was not as impactful as some of his other experiences. And again, that's okay. But as a reader, I just want to let you guys know when I see phrases like this is the immediate first thought that I have. Okay, next we have this other asterisk. This is for an EMT position. After being nationally registered at the end of 2019, I joined to start running calls. Before I was sent home halfway through the semester, I ran 6 shifts. I was directly involved in patient care, stabilizing broken bones, running 12 leads in the field, personal experience with treating patients, immense responsibility of healthcare professionals. This is kind of the cliche that I'm talking about, right? I wish to develop my capabilities in medical school to be better equipped to meet this standard, right? Also kind of a cliche that you'll read a lot. Since being home, I've procured reciprocity, I don't really know what that means, of my license. I plan to resume running calls when COVID-19 is over. Okay, so this cliche falls flat because immense responsibility is weak. Contrast this with a strong reason and the cliche will suddenly hit. The reason I don't feel very compelled to believe this phrase, I understand the immense responsibility of healthcare professionals, is that he ran 6 shifts and he stopped his license and he really only had 50 hours and 1 month of experience here. Again, this is not his fault, but I'm starting to show you a different example of how if you are going to say something big like this, where you understand the responsibility of healthcare professionals, I am also prepared to say, okay, but where's the proof and where's the evidence? And so I want to make sure that we're not overstretching anything. And I want to make sure that the things that were really meaningful to you, that you really drive them home with the stories and the data so that these phrases really hit. Without the data, without the stories, this doesn't really feel like it's that compelling. Another thing that I like that he did here that is kind of besides the point, but he starts writing phrases like running calls or running 12 leads in the field, right? This is what I call like in-crowd writing or inside jokes, essentially is what they are. There's a language and a jargon to medicine. You don't need to know all the acronyms or things like this, but if you're an EMT, you call your shifts like running calls, and we call EKG leads like running 12 leads in the field. And so there's when you use that language, it gives me more confidence that, oh, okay, this person starts to understand, or I can see that this person was an EMT, spent time in the field, things of that sort, because his language reflects that. So just something nice that I saw that he did well there. Okay, looking for more asterisks here. We've read this one before, but this one, again, shows you how impactful numbers look on this page, right? Instead of just a wall of text, which is kind of here, we have a wall of text that's broken up by numbers: 400 to 600 disadvantaged people, $200,000 in services, a budget of $10,000, 62% living below the federal poverty line, double the statewide rate of 27%, 12 with no health insurance, 14 with no dental insurance. So you're starting to see how data is queen, right? And stories are king, and data is queen. So that's a great example of how data really supports that. Okay, now this is one where we've read already as well, but kind of the story of driving 4 hours to a clinic on a Friday night, doing that long 12-hour shift on a Saturday, and then doing that long 6-hour shift on a Sunday before driving another 4 hours back home. There's a little bit of that camaraderie. And some of these details here, calling over the radio for a Spanish interpreter on table 4, those are the details in the stories that really just drive that piece forward. Stories are king, data is queen. Okay, so I think that is point number 2. Number 3, it is okay and should be okay that not every activity is absolutely life-changing. Let's see some of these triangles to see some activities that we can tell are not life-changing, and that is okay. And let's see if he overstretches it or he just does it justice. All right. So this is, he's part of this healthcare fraternity, Alpha Epsilon Delta, or AED. I became a member of AED after 3 semesters. As a member of the club, I volunteered at an event for people with Down syndrome. We had a get-together, bonded over delicious food and dance-inspiring music. I was elected to be the historian of the club. I kept a log of all that we did in each meeting and what we plan to do in the future. I then posted it on the social media app to keep absent members and prospective members to the club informed. So this is just extremely to the point, right? He doesn't stretch it and say that he was heavily inspired by all the patients or all the people and the volunteering that he did, right? This is a 20-hour activity. He doesn't say that being historian of the club has made him a better doctor, which is something that I see in a lot of applications where some far off outlandish event suddenly gets connected back to being a doctor, and it's a huge stretch, right? I did this on my own application, so I made that mistake for sure, but not everything has to connect to medicine. I just like how in this one, he tells you exactly what he did, what it did for him, and he doesn't make it miraculous. He does it justice. He doesn't overdo it. He's straightforward and to the point, right? And that's okay. And that's how it should be. Let's see if there's another example here. Yes, so there's another one for his data entry intern. He interns for 2 summers. Notice this is an extensive time commitment, right? 250 hours. For 2 summers under a neurosurgeon who's developing a remote health monitoring app, created a database of many drugs, including their names, indications, contraindications, interactions, and side effects. He worked alone. The next summer, he got some coworkers and then helped them get through the job. We coordinated and delegated effectively as a team to get through the rest of the list. Again, not miraculous, right? He certainly could have made it miraculous. Working with a neurosurgeon is very fancy. A remote health monitoring app feels very modern, but he keeps it straightforward, right? You absolutely will try things, and they may not be your favorite world-changing experience, and that's okay. He spent 250 hours in this. Contrast that with the hours he spent here. That's almost the same hour as his 1,556 glasses experience, 312 hours, right? And for his health or community service, $200,000 donated in services. That's 300 hours, so very similar. His basic science research is 400 hours. So this might be the most amount of time he spent outside of those meaningful activities. But you notice that he doesn't overdo it. He doesn't try to make it seem that like now he wants to be a neurosurgeon that does digital health monitoring and, healthcare and biotech are the future. Like he doesn't make any of those big outlandish claims because I imagine he did this. He was okay with it. He didn't love it as much as he loved his vision stuff, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be life-changing. You don't have to connect everything in medicine. You don't have to swing for the fences. So those are two great examples of making sure that you recognize that when you're in an activity that you didn't love, but you did like, or you learned something from, you don't need to overdo it. Recognize that not everything can be the most significant. That's why we only get 3 of them. We can't have everything be generic, something lukewarm. Like we can't have 15 data entry positions where all of it is kind of lukewarm and not overdone. But we also don't want to have, we don't want to fly on the other end of the spectrum as well and have everything be over the top, saving lives left and right, wanting to be the world's greatest neurosurgeon digital app person. It's okay to have activities that are not your most meaningful, right? Okay, so those are the 3 big conclusions. Let us go back to the top of the application to see of other things that I really enjoyed as a kind of thorough run through of this application. So number 1, some awards, I think a lot of you will put some awards on your application. And for awards, just recognize that some awards carry more weight than others. Most awards carry weight when there's some sort of relativity, right? Where you are compared relative to others. For example, like your letters of recommendations, when your professor says, this is the top 7, this is a pre-med who lives in the top 7 of the 65 pre-meds I've mentored that have gone to go to Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, like my professor wrote for me, that gives you like a relative comparison. He's not the best, but he's also not in the 30th, 40th, 50th. He's kind of in that top 7 world, right? So valedictorian gives you some relativity because that's the top 1 of all the high schoolers. But some of these other things like 3.95 GPA, summa cum laude, redundant because I know your GPA, it's 4.0. President's list, top 10% GPA, also redundant. I know your GPA, it's 4.0. I imagine that's top 10%. I'm not saying that you shouldn't put it. I'm just making you aware that most of these awards that are redundant, I already know, right? I already know just by looking at your GPA, which is not 3.95, it's actually 4.0. And then AED, 3.5 plus GPA, 10 hours of service. Okay, great. So the only one that really stands out to me here is like Phi Beta Kappa, where you're in the upper 10% of the class, or valedictorian because they have some of that relativity here. We talked about this one already. We talked about the volunteer one. All right, chemistry tutor. So this is an example, 161 hours. After I struggled in high school chemistry, I had relearned it well enough to be asked by my professor to tutor the subject in my 3rd and final year. I love this because it shows this trait of like perseverance, the turnaround, things of that sort, without ever saying the word perseverance. This is the classic like show, don't tell philosophy. You'll say that I struggled in high school chemistry, but now I tutor high school chemistry, and that demonstrates perseverance without ever saying it. Tell me you persevere without telling me you persevere. It's kind of like that meme there. I tutored subjects in general and organic chemistry up to 7 hours a week, but because we had to all return home, we tutored online. I'm usually very hands-on when I teach, making notes on all my iPads, drawing diagrams, walking through how to answer calculations. So tutoring over Zoom required us to make adjustments. Again, he doesn't say that he is very flexible, adaptable, as many other pre-meds will write. I am very flexible. I am dependable. I am adaptable. I am consistent, right? He shows you that by saying, look, normally I help people by drawing diagrams on the board. I make notes on their iPad, but I can't do that on Zoom now. So this is what I did instead in this online world. It shows the same thing without ever saying, I am adaptable, I am determined, I am consistent. And the stories make it a little bit more clear. My students and I adapted quickly, allowing them to continue to be successful despite the new barriers to learning. I just made a note here that it's kind of hard to prove that. And so I guess I have to just believe you that your students will continue to be successful. That for those reasons, phrases like that are really hard to interpret or really hard to put any weight into. Okay, so we talked about this Uber one. We talked about this community health fair and the AED one. This is the shadowing. Notice only 46 hours, right? Which is not bad, not good. I think it's a very appropriate level of shadowing. And I like the breadth of shadowing that he has. Anesthesiology, patient consultations, analysis of CT and PET scans, probably a radiologist here or an oncologist, and then analysis of MRI CT, probably a radiologist there. Okay. We talked about that. Pre-med coordinator is a new one. I joined this during my first year, and it introduced me to pre-med life. We hosted club socials, seminars, talks, and traveled to clinics. In my last year, I was elected as a coordinator of the club. I helped new students plan their class schedules. I advised them on the extracurriculars to pursue. I mean, this guy's a great advisor. Look at his extracurricular activities and the strategy he took to do more before better, before new, right? This guy, I imagine, would be a great advisor. Directing them to valuable resources for applying to medical school. And of course, he did very well. So I'm glad that he's helping other people do very well. And connecting them to volunteer and leadership opportunities. Great. Again, this is a great example of how simple and straightforward this is. It doesn't try to be something it isn't. He doesn't try to over expand it. He doesn't try to overreach. It's a simple activity, and it's just that. It doesn't say that he, from this activity in these 40 hours, made him realize just how important teaching was to the art of medicine, and when he becomes a doctor, he wants to give seminars across the world, right? These are real examples that I'm thinking of people really overextending relatively simple activities. Next, we have this hobbies and strength training here. My first semester was stressful. I took 17 credits. I was not on a sports team, but I could use some exercise. Went to the gym 3 to 5 days a week to lift weights, positive relief stress, personal accountability, general confidence. When the going gets tough, I know I can go to the gym to recharge and get ready to work again, and it's something I can share with my patients. Okay, fine. So this is kind of the counterexample, right? I think he does a great job of keeping everything straightforward, and then at the end, he really has to connect it to medicine. I don't think you have to, right? Weight training can just be your release. You don't have to take the physical and mental well-being that you get from weightlifting and share it with your patients. Like, that doesn't have to happen. Not everything has to connect with medicine. And the other thing that I notice here is that I love how kind of casual he writes. I mean, I think there are admissions committee members that won't like this, but personally, I find it to be refreshing, the way that he writes here. I figured I could use some exercise. It seems like a very young, lively person way of talking and writing, and that gets reflected, and his voice is seen on the page. And then he writes, when the going gets tough, right? Again, another very casual phrase. You won't see that in your classic keynote TED Talk or whatever it is. I'm not sure I fully recommend it because admissions committees can be a little bit on the older side, but I do love the personality that's coming through. Okay. All right. So let's wrap up with this fantastic personal statement, and then that will be the application. Although it was unorthodox for volunteers to stray from blank's first come, first serve mantra, I felt that the circumstances demanded modification to the standard protocol. An elderly lady traveled several hours for her glasses, had to begin her trip back within minutes so that she wasn't late for her night shift. At the same time, she needed those glasses to overcome the difficulties her lack of visual acuity presented at work. So a lady comes because she needs glasses. It takes her several hours, but she has to leave soon because she has to go to work. In her position in line, her glasses would not have been ready for at least another hour. And so I took her tray out of line, squeezed it through the rest of the stations without slowing down others, and then with her pair complete, I went to screw the lenses into the frames and assisted my trainees where I was needed, all the while hoping the gift of vision that provided her would allow her to improve her performance at work, making her life just a little easier. I just love how he understands this woman's situation, right? Let me just move this up higher. You get this woman who is late to the fair because she had to travel several hours. After driving 2, 3, 4 hours, you recognize, holy cow, I have to leave in 15 minutes and drive 2, 3, 4 hours back. Otherwise, I won't get to work. And you're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you can't see at work. And that's the whole reason you came to this fair in the first place. So it kind of sucks for this woman, but she has swallowed her pride and said, well, I'm just going to burn the 2, 3, 4 hours. It's a good try. I'm going to drive back without anything in hand. He recognizes that, and he goes ahead and gives her the glasses. I think I'm starting to realize this is an example of tell me you're empathetic without saying the word empathy, right? He's starting to really understand this person's situation. Through my work with Blank, I had the opportunity to serve patients in 8 rural cities, and I was given a window into the lives of some of the people suffering most in this country. This experience opened my eyes to the difficulties people have in their jobs and educational pursuits due to health-related barriers such as poor vision. Physicians see people at some of the most vulnerable points at the time. Disadvantaged people at this point suffer disproportionately more, lacking the resources to get past what, for many people, may only be temporary tribulations. So that's kind of the double whammy effect in society, right? Disadvantaged people don't have access to things, and when everyone suffers, disadvantaged people also suffer even more than the normal person. So you have less access, and when you need the access, you have less access, and you need the access more because you suffer more because you're inherently disadvantaged. So an insult to the disadvantage comes to be increasingly difficult to get through. I think this is really interesting because he takes his perspective, and I find the vision metaphor to be kind of beautiful here, where he's like taking off the lens that he has on his own society, like coming from his own background, and putting on the lens of the underserved to understand kind of where they're coming from, what their struggles are. I think it's also kind of beautiful that he's a person who's like screwing in the nails or the screws so that he can give a new set of glasses to the folks in the underserved. I find that to be a very fitting metaphor. I first gained sight, so I wrote here, literally taking off your own lens and putting on that of another person's. Again, tell me you're empathetic without telling me you're empathetic. I first gained insight into the physician's ability to give people a sense of agency when I was a young teenager attending this. After a traditional midnight hike during which campers were given time to bond, my counselor offered to stay up longer when he sensed that I had more to share. Through sunrise and prayer, or just a few hours away, he conversed with me long into the night, listening to what I had to say and gave me actionable advice. It was the first time someone really took me aside and discussed my feelings with me, and it added another facet to my understanding of how doctors heal. Blank utilized the same skills that he employed while treating disconsolate children in Syrian refugee camps, imparting a sense of clarity that enabled me to develop a strong sense of identity during my formative years. Reading this, I think this comment is kind of spot on. It's difficult to interpret. We don't really have a lot of context because I don't know what they talked about. I just know that they talked 4 hours into the night. I don't know more about the applicant after reading this. In fact, I know more about the counselor who treated disconsolate children in Syrian refugee camps. I don't really get a sense of what he learned from this person other than he took the time to sit and listen and talk about something that is unclear to me. So I think this paragraph does a little bit, it gets me a little bit hazier of an understanding of the applicant. Moves me away from some of the other writing. When shadowing Blank, who is a retinologist, I observed how physicians empower their patients in the clinical setting, and was seeing a new patient with diabetic retinopathy, and the patient was visibly and understandably distraught because he could lose his vision. It was inspiring to see how attuned he was to this patient's concern despite having just met him, and how he's able to methodically explain the patient's diagnosis and treatment options. He could administer medication through an injection, but the main determinant of whether or not the patient would lose his vision was his ability to control his sugar levels. Armed with knowledge of the disease and what he could do to modify its impact, the patient felt motivated to take an active role in his care by improving his diet. I mean, I love this story because I think in medicine we find a lot of physicians who have very specialized skill sets. Orthopedic surgeons love to use a hammer, right? Retinologists love to inject things into the eyes. And we all have these very specialized tools, but one thing that's very powerful here is that I could certainly inject a medication through your eye, but the main reason is, can you control your sugar level, right? Which is not fully related to all the years an ophthalmologist does of training. It's really like, this is the most fundamental reason you are at risk of losing your eyes. And I find that a lot of physicians really just kind of stop here and say, yeah, I guess I can help for a little bit and inject the eye, but don't really hit this full deep cause. So I wrote that here. I love how the retinologist doesn't feel the need to throw his hammer at this problem. And I forget the idiom, but it's like, when you have a hammer, everything in the world looks like a nail or something like this. Sometimes your words and reassurance is more effective than your hands and your training, right? And I think this is a good example of a story that demonstrates that. I've applied the lessons that I've learned from blank and blank by practicing the skill of empowering people as a chemistry tutor. Dipole, and ionic bonds, hardly related to memorize the difference between them. Instead, I explain these forces as being on a gradient of electrostatic attraction, which help them to relate all to one unifying principle. was easier to understand. Rapport I built with my students not only enabled them to succeed in chemistry, but also motivated them to take the initiative in every other aspect of their studies. For example, my friend, who I was the tutor and mentor for, excelled in her first year of college, despite having to adjust from being homeschooled her entire life. Very interesting. I believe that my teaching experience, which enhanced my ability to communicate and inspire confidence in others, will add nuance to the way I practice medicine. So this paragraph is very similar to kind of, where's this other paragraph? There's a chemistry tutor paragraph that we talked about earlier. It's similar to this chemistry tutor paragraph, right? He's talking about his experience with teaching, but it's also kind of hard to interpret, right? I wrote, again, difficult to resonate with because the concept and the story are kind of one step removed. We're not quite in the room. There's not like a lot of details for me to chomp into and say like, oh, I understand, or I resonate with that, or I'm on the floor in the classroom with you here. You're talking about electrostatic rate attractions and dipole-dipoles and ionic bonds, and this student who was in her first year of college and came from being homeschooled. Interesting, like I would like to know what that was like. Like, what was the problems for someone transitioning from homeschool to being in the first year? What was the problem for someone who couldn't understand these general chemistry problems? I think we're giving specifics, yes, but the specifics don't help us, quote, be in the room, or don't help us understand or relate to what it is that you're describing. And so I feel kind of one step removed from this paragraph. All right. Lastly, disadvantaged individuals who are medically impaired are often just a few steps away from a path that could divert them to success. Physicians have a unique opportunity to support and empower their patients' crucial turning points. As I have done in my experience as a tutor and volunteer, I aim to support people during these moments and gift a sense of agency when it is needed most, especially to the medically underserved. It's this passion and perspective that I hope to infuse in my eventual practice as a physician. Okay, so we went from like tutoring people in general chemistry to disadvantaged individuals who are medically impaired. It was a little bit of whiplash for me. I was like, whoa, okay, I got to reset. But with that being said, this is just kind of my, these are my reactions as a reader, and I know that not every admissions committee member will have the same reaction. I'm just kind of sharing what I see. I've come to the end. I haven't come to the end of the personal statement fully convinced, and that's okay. This is just his story. This is his personal statement, and not every personal statement is going to be perfect. Mine has many of these mistakes and many, many more. You don't have to have a perfect personal statement, but these are just examples of what we read together and what we can learn to see if we can do any of these things particularly better in our own writing. And the reason I haven't fully come convinced is that, again, we have this odd transition from general chemistry to disadvantaged individuals. We get this paragraph where we talk about this counselor who worked with Syrian refugees, but doesn't really share that much about him. We have this retinologist that does a great job of, again, making sure that he gives the patient or she gives the patient exactly what the patient needs, as opposed to just using your hands in your training. The world is a nail if all you have is a hammer type of philosophy. But again, not really much about him in this paragraph. And so we get a lot of these interesting stories where you see how his philosophies have been shaped in life. And when he tries to give his example of him applying these lessons in his general chemistry, I personally don't fully see it. I'm not fully convinced. I think the connections are a little bit loose there. But again, that's okay. That's okay. We have to tell our own story, and sometimes our own story doesn't perfectly make sense. I loved this intro paragraph here because you really get a sense that he understands this woman's situation. He did something about it, and he sent this woman on her way back and thanked her with a pair of glasses because she had invested hours of her time to try and get to the community health fair, right? These two paragraphs feel like they hit much more because the story feels very personal. He's heavily involved in it. He's taking off his own lenses and putting on lenses of another person. And he's actually making lenses and giving that to that other patient and community as well. So I think the opening is very strong. The rest of these, I think, feel a little bit overstretched and a little bit harder to relate to, especially because he's not fully involved with those stories. He's kind of a bystander. Okay. So that is this fantastic application. Again, a 4.0 521 will open a ton of doors for you. But I think he does a fantastic set of things in his extracurricular activities that we can learn from. And there are things in his personal statements that I think can be improved for our own sake. These are the conclusions: more, better, new. I love the depth that he takes with the vision theme. I love the stories and data that he has in his writing that just erase the issue of cliches. And I love how for some activities, he's just very straightforward and says, this is what I did, this is who I did it for, and that's it. I love how he doesn't overstretch it. Okay, that is that application. I will see you guys in the next one.
If you learned anything from this video, you'll love this video here where I go over a 3.9 GPA, 519 MCAT Premed who got into multiple top 10 medical schools, including a full ride to a top 5 medical school, UCLA, where he was one of my classmates. When you're able to combine a very strong narrative with well-defined themes and a wow factor with outstanding stats like a 3.9 GPA and a 519 MCAT, every medical school door is open to you. If you want to know what one of the most competitive pre-meds in the nation looks like, I will see you in this video.